Hello, this is your host of PoliTalks, and we're pleased to have as our guest today attorney and business consultant Varoujan Avedikian, who is the principal at TK & Partners, one of Armenia's leading business and legal consulting firms, which specializes in helping foreign investors and local investors navigate the legal and regulatory system in Armenia. Mr. Avedikian is also a graduate of Harvard University, and he's a former general counsel to Armenia's central bank, and is also currently a lecturer at the French University of Armenia in Business and Financial Law. Welcome to our program, Mr. Avedikian.
Thank you.
I want to start off with a general question. What do you think are the biggest opportunities or growth areas for investors, specifically foreign investors, and what are the primary challenges faced by investors entering the Armenian market?
Thank you for the question. And that's the million-dollar question, as I would call it, because the Armenian economy, being a small economy, Armenia being a landlocked country, has to figure out what are some of its strengths that it can propose to the outside investor. And my guess, or from my experience, I'm seeing the engineering industry, tech industry, pharmaceuticals, might be a good option, financial sector, and light industries, like textiles and shoemaking, leather products. For the past few years, the tourism industry, I think, is booming, is increasing. So that might be another opportunity to invest for a foreign investor. So these are some of the sectors that I'm seeing, but also what are some of the main challenges that I'm seeing as an attorney practicing here in Armenia for my clients. Of course, the usual bureaucratic hurdles that happen in almost every country are there, but some of the bigger issues that I'm seeing is that if you want to set up a business here, a medium-sized business, I'm not talking a small shop, but a medium-sized business, when interacting with the government, you need to find people inside the government who would help you, who would guide you. So we have this kind of a paternalistic approach of government helping investors to do their business. From the first look of it, it seems fine, but if you dig deeper, then you find out that creates extra problems for the investors. First of all, because if someone doesn't want to interact with a government official, it would be very difficult for him or her to do business here. And when I'm saying this, I'm not saying this because I believe necessarily those officials are corrupt. No, it's just the way it is.
That's not a simple process of
So most
entry.
of the interactions, most of the processes are not digitized. You cannot interact with the government generally. There are some services which are digitized, but most of the services are not. Applying for a license, applying for an authorization to build a property, to renovate. So all these processes are mainly not digitized. So you need to find someone to help you, to guide you.
Yeah, I wanted to deal with an issue, and this is more of an issue of this is the sort of the old wives' tales in the diaspora of what I call the old myths of you're going to set up a business and someone's going to come and say, a well-connected person, this is mine, and walk away from it. Or I've heard that dozens of stories like this, but no one can ever show me an example of it. Am I correct in categorizing these as myths, and there's no basis in reality?
It is a big myth, and I found out, actually 2 years ago, I found that from my American Armenian friends, why is that myth? Because when I was talking to them, I found out they're watching these TV series, that show a lot of mafia, imaginary mafia, and killings and illegal activities. They knew this series better than any local Armenian living here. So my guess is that those myths are also coming from there. But not only, of course. These are tales, these are stories. I can tell you that that's a myth, that's a big myth. And another myth that is out there, I think, is that if if we're all Armenians and we speak the same language and we believe in the same faith, then we should be able to do business easily. That's another myth. That's not the case. We are not the same Armenians. We don't speak the same language. Well, yes, we believe in the same faith, but we don't even share a lot of common history, maybe. So we should keep these two myths in perspective. So when someone is coming here, and 70% of investors in Armenia are diasporan Armenians, even more than 70%.
Well, those differences can also be opportunities.
Yes.
In so many ways. You recently wrote a very cognitive article about what you called Brand Armenia. And you said that prior to last April, Armenia, if you Googled Armenia, it was landlocked, genocide, nothing positive for the most part. And now the brand Armenia is revolution, which was positive in some ways, or for a period of time. But your case, from what I understood, is that it's time to move on from that brand revolution. And I wanted to come directly to the government. This current government has been very aggressive on their anti-corruption drives. Some of it are uncontroversial, to be honest, with some of the characters they've gone after, especially early on. But there's this, how much does this aggressive anti-corruption drive, even if it's warranted in many cases, if not most cases, how much does it hurt or scare away foreign investors?
I believe there are some risks for investments in terms of fight against this corruption. It's very important to fight corruption, but I believe that the most important tool in fighting corruption is not fighting people, but fighting processes, streamlining the process, having better processes, bringing in better policy, and to decrease the corruption risks. So if you only go after businesses who might have been in corrupt practices, we should understand why they were there. What is their environment they're working on? And I can give you many examples when companies had to bribe maybe, or give out gifts to public officials to have ease of business, because they were interacting with outside partners, because they had to move fast and they had to conquer new markets, new niches, etc. So we have to understand why corruption was happening and what we should do to decrease all the processes, or most of the processes, most of the policies that are putting more oil on the fire and generating more corruption.
I think that's, I think you're absolutely right. Obviously, corruption there's a big difference between someone would be honest in an honest environment, forced to be corrupt to move their business forward, because that's the price you have to pay. And on the other hand, you have the other extreme of people that were given, monopolies in different sectors of the economy, which is a complete unacceptable. There's no excuse for that. And I want to transition from one to the other. What do you think were the every regime creates its positives and negatives? What market distortions do you believe the old regime created? Even though you can also make the case that some of the things they did had positive results, but the kind of policies that they had, what kind of market distortions did you see as a business consultant that hindered the country?
I think this habit of when we started talking, I mentioned about this, having the insider guy. Okay, you need to have an insider guy who would help you, and this doesn't come from the middle ranks. It comes from very high up, and I've heard many stories, and I've been in such meetings when high-ranking public officials said previously to foreign investors, Armenian or non-Armenian, that please do invest in our country. I will be your personal guarantor. That's not so. It gave the message to all other public officials that you need to act as a paternalistic figure in helping businesses. But and in many instances, I've seen investors who left the country because they said, you shouldn't be my guarantor. The law and the court should be my guarantor.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it comes, that's a major, I think, distortion.
You know, sometimes we give too much credit or put too much emphasis on policy and economic development. As important as policy is in economic development, and it can actually hurt it or it can help it, there's a tendency to give elected officials, politicians, planners too much credit sometimes for what happens in an economy. There's a famous line from Khrushchev where he said, you know, all politicians around the world are the same, no matter the ideology, they're all building bridges where there's no rivers. That's what they're busy doing because they like to go to openings. What are the sectors of the Armenian economy that have advanced, but not through any planned policy, but they've advanced for their own reasons, or progress for their own reasons, where they haven't been particularly helped by the state, or if they just grew through natural processes of people acting on their own? What would you point to?
I think the tourism industry, and especially the restaurant industry. We have about 1,000 restaurants in Yerevan, downtown Yerevan now. And one can certainly say that the service is generally good, prices are reasonable, the quality of food is good. That's the restaurant business. That I didn't see a lot of support from the government to the restaurant business, except that a couple of years ago the government decided that they should forbid the health inspectorate, as they used to call it, to do some inspections.
Which was the center of corruption.
Yeah, that was the center of corruption, because they came, they said, well, you don't have a window here, then you have to pay us a fine or give us a bribe, etc., etc. So by not intruding into the business, but by not giving any legislative or tax advantages, etc., this industry grew. So I'm a strong proponent of the liberal approach in terms of economic policy, when you allow the government focuses on infrastructure and public services and lets businesses do business.
And the market forces handle it.
Yes.
So what do you think, if you're going to put your biggest, I mean, we've sort of dealt with this issue, but I want to get more specific about it. What is the biggest misconception? I'm not Armenian. I come from Germany. I represent a mid-sized German business, and I want to do something here for whatever reason. What is the biggest misconception that people have generally when they come here to do business? What are they most wrong about?
Well, first of all, I would say that those who decide to come here, they don't come here out of the blue.
So it's a well thought out.
Yes, so they know about Armenia generally, they've done their research, most probably they have an Armenian connection. And I'm not saying this as a good point, I'm bringing this as a negative point. Because I always ask my question, what should we do that a foreign investor, as you said, a German or a Brit or an Italian or a Chinese, would walk to Armenia without Armenian connection and say, I want to invest in this country because this country is doing good. We don't have that. And that's a huge drawback.
Okay.
We don't have that. We don't have any foreign investor that doesn't have any Armenian partner, Armenian connection, some kind of an attachment to Armenia or the diaspora, etc.
I'm almost certain you're 100% correct. However, at the same time, I think there's very few countries that I can actually, I mean, outside of the Chinas and the Indias of the world, and even then, even in China, you know, it was the foreign Chinese that brought in a lot of the early businesses. It was the diaspora Chinese. I mean, for a small country, that's not that unusual, even though I think what you're saying is the standard that you want to reach.
Yes.
It's what you should shoot for.
Yes.
But we're not there, nowhere near there.
Small, we're landlocked, etc., etc. So there should be some kind of a connection. But that should be the standard over there. So we should work towards that way, and we should do everything in our power to make sure that anyone who comes here with or without an Armenian connection, comes here to do business, because this is a good country for doing business.
Let's talk about you are in a perfect situation. You are the principal advisor to Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, and you don't have access to billions of dollars to spend. Give me the 2 or 3 regulatory things that you can do that cost nothing or very little, but it's just smart government that will help spur economic growth and create more jobs. What would it be?
Okay. So there is a very nice video on YouTube. It's a big experiment, scientific experiment they did back. They did back in starting in 1990s in the U.S. With the Yellowstone Park. At one point in the Yellowstone Park, there were no wolves. Have you seen that?
I've seen that.
And when they introduced the wolves, right, what happened? They saw that the wolves, they start eating the deers who were grazing the grass, and new species started coming in, and they changed the rivers, and so all other beautiful things happened when they introduced the wolves. I think we should introduce wolves. And when I say wolves,
well, you have to be careful with that because there's been a lot of wolves here and they haven't done much good.
Well, I love wolves. I consider them wonderful. I consider them wonderful animals.
No, I know.
Very important for the environment.
I'm talking about the human wolves.
No, metaphorically. Yeah. So what I would advise to do is to bring in 1,000 diasporan Armenians who are business oriented. I would focus on Lebanon, for example, Lebanese Armenian who are very business savvy, and not only Lebanese Armenian, but just to give an example, although I'm biased, having lived in Lebanon for so many years, but that's why I'm saying Lebanese Armenian. Bring in 1,000 Armenians diaspora and give them tax break for 5 years. Say, do whatever you want. Just change the business environment. Because I've talked to many Armenian businessmen, small businessmen from Lebanon, from Syria, from Greece, etc. And one thing they've told me, without being able to explain why, is that it is difficult to do business in Armenia. But they can't explain why. So they tell me, back in Lebanon, if I have a business and it's not going well, I change it overnight. I go to another business and it's easy. I don't have to invest a lot of resources. And they're seeing, and this is their subjective approach, that it's difficult. They won't be able to do it in Armenia. For some reason, I know we can talk for hours about hundreds of reasons why is the case. So to use the wolves story metaphorically, bring in business savvy Armenians
change makers.
to change the change maker and bring them in to change the environment, the business environment, ways of doing business. And we saw that happening after the Syrian war, when Syrian Armenians started coming here, either working for local businesses or they opened their own business. And we saw change of standards, change of culture, change of approach to the customer.
Well, I think one of the looking back at it historically, I mean, it's very interesting you talked about that topic about historically, Armenians are a trading people. I mean, if you go, the traders from places like Isfahan, and they traded, Armenians were merchants that dealt in things that the West wanted for hundreds of years, from Iran and different parts of the Middle East and from Armenia proper, all the way to Indonesia, Singapore, Hong Kong, and that is something that we need to get back, because small countries and small peoples have to be trading people, because there's limitations to what you can do. And I was thinking, I mean, obviously a good part of that was the Soviet experience that sort of destroyed that culture, or actually made it illegal and pushed it underground. But I always have this, what I call the apricot example. In Japan, people are used to paying $2, $3 for a single orange. Could you imagine if you promote Armenian apricots in the right way in Japan, you can probably sell them for $15, $20, 5 or 6 of them. People give it. I mean, what do you do, or is it just simply a matter of time? Because you see in the younger generation here, I mean, there are more food trucks here than in most European countries now, and it's all young entrepreneurs who do it. What do you do, or is there anything you can do outside of time and space to create that trading nation mentality, or bring it back? Or is this simply a matter of time?
It certainly is a matter of time, but in terms of, you see, there are some cultures where you go and talk to people, people are business oriented, okay? People are thinking about opening their own business, starting small, growing big, they have a dream. So I'm seeing this culture getting bigger and bigger in Armenia for the past 10 years or so. Especially the younger generation, but not only. We're seeing women in regions, and there are some people like Team Straight, for example, is doing a wonderful job. Others helping women in villages, helping craftsmen in Marses to start their own businesses. So it changes the mindset, it changes the approach that we should create something new. We should have our own capital. And this brings me to a bigger story. Armenians, having lived for a long time under Ottoman rule and then Soviet rule, they learned that they should expect from the government. So an average Armenian expects from the government. We should change that. We should encourage the government, the people, not to expect but to give, because all those who give are those who keep the nation alive. And when I say give, pay taxes. And how do you pay taxes? By doing more business, by investing in your business.
I want to finish up with this final question. There's been a lot of controversy. Obviously, a couple of years ago, there was this big, and I think you were actually involved in negotiations, if I'm not mistaken, among Armenia's EU or EEU relationships. Now, Armenia happens to have relationships with both, actually, except it's a member of EEU. And personally, I see the EEU as more of a political project than an economic one. At least, I think that was the genesis of it. The intent was to sort of keep certain countries closer to the Russian sphere of influence economically. However, having said that, it has economic components that could be useful in the sense that when you were talking about the foreign investor, you should not have no more the idea that you're dealing with a market of 2 or 3 million people, but you have access to a market of couple of 100 million people, and by extension even more if you consider free trade agreements with countries like Iran. So everyone in Armenia knows the negatives of the EU and talks about it, even most laymen. What are the opportunities there? And what are the opportunities for business entry for other people that can use this country as it's actually a unique situation to have good relations with the EU, be in the EU, have good relations with Iran, have good relations with the United States. It's sort of a unique situation.
Definition of a hub.
Yeah.
Definition of a hub.
So how do you take advantage of that? And what are the opportunities? Because I don't think anyone has spelled them out.
Yeah. So first of all, it's a great selling point. When you say, I'm not a market of 3 million, but we have access of a market of 500 million, that's a different story to tell. Your customers, your investors, your partners. So your market is bigger. That's a great selling point. And actually, one has to go in and develop that market, work on that market, and try to build networks there. Like some Armenian companies were doing or are still doing currently. The second thing is that Armenia is a country, I believe, that can survive on innovations. And for innovations to happen, you should experiment. And to do your experiments, you need space, you need population, you need masses. You can't do experiments in a small number of people or small economy. So you need a bigger economy to do it. And that's what EU gives you. It's a large economy. You can do your experiment with a new product, with a new service, new kind of an innovation. So that's a second great advantage that it...
do you know any examples of that currently or no? Or is it just too early in the process?
That's an opportunity I'm talking about.
Yeah, so it's not there yet?
No.
Okay. Well, Mr. Avedikian, it was a pleasure having you on our show. And
thank you.
Thanks for being our guest. Thank you.